A single photograph hanging on a wall in North London captured something raw, violent, and utterly real. Two men, one grabbing the collar of the other, fist cocked, eyes burning with pure, unadulterated hatred. The smaller man standing there, not cowering, not flinching, just holding his ground. Zero context, no warning. Just two gladiators on a muddy pitch in 1966. That smaller man was Billy Bremner. 5 feet, 5 inches tall, 10 stone of barbed wire. In modern football, that interaction is a 3-match ban, a massive PR apology statement, and 3 days of outrage on Twitter. In 1966, it was just another Tuesday afternoon in the English Football League. Just gone. Bye-bye. Let's set the stage. Leeds United in the late 1960s and 1970s wasn't just a football club. They were an absolute machine built for war. Managed by Revie, they earned a reputation across Britain as the dirtiest, most ruthless team in the history of the sport. Opponents didn't just prep tactics before playing at Elland Road. They checked their health insurance. And right at the center of that tactical hurricane stood Billy Bremner. He didn't look like an enforcer. He didn't have the height of a central defender or the muscle mass of a heavyweight boxer. But Bremner possessed something far more dangerous. Zero fear and an absolute refusal to break. He operated in a mid-century football landscape defined by lenient referees, heavy leather balls that absorbed water like sponges, and pitches that turned into mud swamps by November. If you played in midfield back then, you didn't just need vision and touch. You needed to survive. Bremner faced every monster the British game had to offer. But near the end of his career, when asked who pushed him to the absolute limit, he didn't name generic teams. He named 5 specific men. 5 battles that defined an era of brutal, brilliant football. The list starts with a man who looked less like a professional athlete and more like a local tailor. Nobby Stiles. Short, toothless, wearing thick contact lenses, Stiles was Manchester United's ultimate destroyer. While George Best provided the magic and Bobby Charlton provided the grace, Stiles was Matt Busby's guard dog. His job was simple: find the opposition's best playmaker and eliminate them from the match. When Leeds matched up against Manchester United in the mid to late 60s, the battle in the center of the park was pure tactical anarchy. Bremner was the engine room of Leeds. If Bremner moved, Leeds moved. Stiles knew this. He didn't just tackle Bremner. He haunted him. He stepped on his boots off the ball. He pulled his shirt during corner kicks. He whispered subtle, vicious insults into his ear every time the referee turned his head to follow the play. Nobby didn't care about the ball, one contemporary pundit noted years later. He cared about your ankles. It was a psychological war of attrition. For 90 minutes, Bremner couldn't just execute Revie's tactical shape. He had to physically fight for every single inch of grass. Stiles forced Leeds to completely adjust how they moved the ball out of midfield. If Bremner took 2 touches instead of 1, Stiles was straight through the back of his calves. It was relentless. It was agonizing. But it set the standard for what Bremner realized he had to face every single weekend. If Nobby Stiles was a tactical grind, the next man on Bremner's list brought absolute public chaos. August 10th, 1974. The Charity Shield at Wembley Stadium. Over 67,000 fans packed into the stands, with millions watching live on television. Liverpool against Leeds United. The traditional season opener, meant to showcase sportsmanship and elite English talent. Instead, it turned into an absolute disaster on national TV. The tension had been building for years. Liverpool's golden boy, Kevin Keegan, was fast, agile, and adored by the press. Bremner saw him as an obstacle that needed to be neutralized immediately. From the opening whistle, Bremner and his defensive partner Johnny Giles subjected Keegan to a brutal succession of late hits and off-the-ball shoves. Then came the 60th minute. Giles clipped Keegan late near the touchline. Keegan turned around, furious, ready to confront Giles. Out of nowhere, Bremner flew into the frame, throwing a shoulder directly into Keegan's chest and striking him in the head. Keegan snapped. In front of a stunned national audience, Keegan threw a right hook at Bremner's jaw. Bremner threw one right back. For 5 insane seconds, Wembley, turned into a street fight. The referee didn't hesitate. Red cards for both. What happened next became legendary. As both men walked off the pitch toward the tunnel, Keegan ripped his shirt off in absolute fury and threw it to the ground. Seconds later, Bremner did the exact same thing, tearing off his Leeds jersey and dropping it on the grass in total disrespect to the authority of the FA. The aftermath was historic. Both players were slapped with massive 11-match bans and unprecedented fines. The media condemned them as dynamic embarrassments to the sport. Let me be fair for a second. Keegan wasn't a dirty player. He was an elite, modern athlete who got pushed past his absolute breaking point by a Leeds team that specialized in psychological torture. But for Bremner, that explosion proved one thing. He could get inside the head of anyone, even England's biggest superstar. If you talk about physical violence in 70s football, one name sits right at the top of the list. Ron Harris. They didn't call him Chopper because he was good with his feet. The rivalry between Leeds United and Chelsea reached its absolute toxic peak in the 1970 FA Cup final. It was more than a football match. It was a cultural war between the hard-nosed northern industrial grit of Leeds and the flashy King's Road glamour of London. And at the center of that war was Ron Harris targeting Billy Bremner. The original final at Wembley ended in a 2-2 draw on a pitch that looked like a freshly plowed potato field. But the replay at Old Trafford, modern refereeing experts analyzed the footage decades later and concluded that the 1970 FA Cup final replay would have resulted in 6 red cards and 20 yellow cards under modern rules. Referee Eric Jennings gave just 1 yellow card the entire match. That single decision unleashed pure violence. Ron Harris made it his personal mission to destroy Bremner's influence on the game. Early in the first half, with the ball 20 yards away, Harris launched himself into a brutal side tackle directly into the side of Bremner's knee. Bremner went down in agony. In modern football, that's in stretcher, an ACL tear diagnosis, and 9 months in rehab. Bremner got up, limped for 2 minutes, spat on the turf, and went right back into the center of the pitch. For 120 minutes, Harris slashed, tripped, and battered Bremner every time he crossed the halfway line. It wasn't about winning the ball. It was about physical attrition. Harris wanted to see if Bremner's body would give out before the final whistle. Former Liverpool defender Gary Neville watched tape of that match years later and called it an absolute crime scene masquerading as a cup final. What made Harris so terrifying wasn't just his aggression. It was his timing. He knew exactly when the referee was looking away. He knew how to put his studs into your ankle while making it look like an accidental trip. He was a master of the dark arts. Bremner later admitted that playing against Ron Harris wasn't about outplaying him tactically. It was about surviving the 90 minutes with all your bones intact. Leeds lost that replay 2-1, but the physical scars from Ron Harris stayed with Bremner for the rest of his life. If Ron Harris was a surgeon of physical dark arts, the next man on Bremner's list was an iron wrecking ball. Tommy Smith, the Iron of Anfield. Legendary Liverpool manager Bill Shankly once famously said of Tommy Smith, "He wasn't born, he was quarried." Shankly even claimed Smith was so terrifying that he used to take his dog for a walk, and people would keep their pets indoors. When Leeds traveled to Anfield, the tunnel was small, dark, and tight. Tommy Smith would stand right near the entrance, leaning against the wall, chewing gum, staring down every single Leeds player as they walked past. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His reputation walked into the room 10 minutes before he did. Smith was a central defender who played with an absolute ruthless mindset. If you entered his penalty area, you were going to get hit. Hard. For a small midfielder like Bremner, crossing paths with Tommy Smith was a physical nightmare. Smith didn't just tackle. He ran straight through people. In a match at Anfield in 1971, Bremner picked up a loose ball on the edge of the box, attempted to drop his shoulder, and burst past Smith. Smith didn't even attempt to play the ball. He stepped directly into Bremner's path and planted a forearm straight into his throat. Bremner hit the deck hard, gasping for air. Did Smith apologize? Did he check if Bremner was breathing? He stood over Bremner, looked down at him, and casually said, "Try that again, son, and you won't walk out of Anfield today." This was psychological terror at the absolute highest level. Most players back then would have avoided Smith's side of the pitch for the rest of the game. They would have passed the ball backward, stayed deep, and played it safe. But this is where the genius of Billy Bremner showed itself. Bremner realized early on that he couldn't beat Tommy Smith in a physical wrestling match. He was 5'5". Smith was built like a brick wall. So Bremner adjusted. He started using low center of gravity, fast one-touch passing, and rapid off-the-ball movement to completely outmaneuver Smith's brute force. He didn't try to knock Smith down. He made Smith chase ghosts. It was a masterclass in adapting to sheer intimidation. Smith tried to break Bremner's spirit, but Bremner used Smith's aggressive momentum against him, carving open Liverpool's defense with quick, short passes before Smith could even land a hit. Smith got the physical hits, but Bremner walked away with the respect of the terrifying Anfield legend. That brings us to number 1, the battle that produced the single most iconic image in the history of British football. Dave Mackay. Mackay was an absolute legend for Tottenham Hotspur and Hearts. Built like a barrel, with massive legs and an incredible football IQ, he was a man who played the game with total honor, total commitment, and terrifying physical strength. He was a player's player. August 20th, 1966. White Hart Lane. To understand the dynamic of this match, you have to understand context. Just months before this game, Dave McKay had suffered a horrific, career-threatening double fracture in his leg. He had fought through agonizing rehabilitation for over a year just to get back onto a football pitch. Everyone in English football knew what McKay had been through. Billy Bremner didn't care. Early in the match, McKay picked up the ball near the sideline. Bremner came flying in from behind with a late, reckless, flying studs-up tackle straight onto McKay's recently healed leg. It was a challenge that could have ended McKay's career permanently. What happened next was captured by Sunday Mirror photographer Monty Fresco, creating a shot that is preserved in football history forever. McKay didn't stay on the ground. He didn't roll around crying for a medic. He stood straight up, hauled Bremner up by his shirt collar with one hand, pulled him in close until their faces were inches apart, and pulled back his right fist. Look at Bremner's face in that picture. He isn't smiling. He isn't crying out for help to the referee. He is staring right back into the eyes of a giant who was ready to break him in half, holding his hands up slightly, accepting the exact reality of what he had done. I was furious, McKay recalled decades later. Not because it was a hard tackle, but because it was on my bad leg. I told him if he ever did that again, I'd take his head off. The referee rushed in, broke them apart, and somehow gave neither man a red card. That photograph became an eternal symbol of British football's golden age of aggression. But here is the part that FIFA, corporate media, and nostalgic historians rarely mention. They weren't mortal enemies off the pitch. They were Scottish international teammates. They shared dressing rooms for the national team. They drank together after games. There was an unspoken code between them. On the pitch, it's absolute war. Outside the lines, it's mutual respect. Bremner later admitted that Dave McKay was the single most intimidating, brilliant, and honorable footballer he ever shared a pitch with. McKay wasn't dirty. He was just an unstoppable force of nature that refused to be bullied. Now, let me be fair for a second. It is easy to look back at these 5 battles, Styles, Keegan, Harris, Smith, and McKay, and dismiss the 1960s and 70s as an uncultured era of uneducated thugs kicking each other into hospital beds. Modern football fans look at those tackle compilations on YouTube and laugh, thinking how soft today's players are compared to men who played through broken bones and concussions. It's easy to frame Billy Bremner as just an aggressive bully who got away with murder because the referees were blind. But that is a complete lie. And here is what the establishment doesn't want you to think about. The real villain of this story isn't Billy Bremner. It isn't Ron Harris. It isn't Tommy Smith. The real villain was the institutional neglect of the football governing bodies of that era. FIFA and the Football League didn't care about player safety. They didn't care that pitches were dangerous mud holes. They didn't care that heavy leather balls caused long-term brain damage. They monetized the brutal violence of the sport while paying the players a fraction of the millions being generated at the turnstiles. They created an environment where players had to become enforcers just to protect themselves. If you were a 5'5" midfielder like Billy Bremner playing in 1968, you had two choices: adapt and become dangerous, or get destroyed and forgotten by the system. Bremner chose to adapt. Don Revie and Leeds United didn't create the dark arts out of nowhere. They simply mastered the broken system FIFA and the FA had allowed to exist. They weaponized the rules because the authorities were too weak, incompetent, or greedy to fix them. Bremner was a tactical product of an institutional environment that prioritized violent spectacle over athlete health. He used his aggression as a shield, hiding one of the most brilliant, elite football minds the British Isles had ever produced. Strip away the violence, the red cards, the brawls at Wembley, and the iconic photos. What are you left with? You are left with a tiny man from Stirling, Scotland, who lifted the First Division trophy twice, won the Inter-Cities Fairs Cup twice, took Leeds to a European Cup final, and captained his country at the 1974 World Cup. Billy Bremner didn't just survive the hardest era in football history. He dominated it. He proved that heart, positional intelligence, and unbreakable willpower will always triumph over sheer physical size. As football today shifts towards sterile, VAR-checked, corporate products where touching an opponent's shirt gets you reviewed by 4 angles in a remote truck, the legendary battles of Billy Bremner feel like stories from an entirely different planet. They were flawed, violent, and wild, but they were entirely real. So, here's my question to you. Was Billy Bremner a master tactician who did whatever it took to survive a brutal system? Or was he just the ringleader of football's dirtiest era? Was the violence of the 70s raw football passion, or an embarrassing period the sport needed to leave behind? Drop your take and your verdict in the comments below. I read every single one. A like on the video genuinely helps get these deep dive exposed stories out to more real fans than you'd think. And make sure to hit that subscribe button right now if you want more raw, unfiltered coverage of football's hidden history and modern controversies. Trust me, this won't be the last story we uncover. Football at this scale is never just a tournament. It's a moment in time. I'll see you in the next one.